The 1st of June, 2007 marked the 40th anniversary of a seminal milestone in the history of popular music, the release of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles. This album, frequently hailed as a catalyst for the progressive aesthetic in rock, inaugurated a new era of sonic and conceptual experimentation that would reverberate through subsequent decades. In the spirit of homage to this anniversary, we commissioned Ian Alterman, a prominent figure in specialized criticism and one of the founders of the prestigious website progarchives.com, with a Herculean task: the curation of a definitive list of the 10 best progressive rock albums. The result transcended initial expectations, offering a perceptive and comprehensive analysis of the genre's masterpieces. The fundamental premise that guided this critical exercise is as follows. Imagine yourself isolated on a desert island, with permission to take with you only a limited number of records, generally around 10. Now, envision the need to share this musical exile with an individual possessing a latent, yet incipient, interest in progressive rock. The central question becomes, then, the selection of a dozen absolutely essential albums capable of providing a panoramic and multifaceted view of the prog universe without incurring the monotony of exhaustive repetition. In other words, the objective is to identify the cream of the crop, works that withstand the scrutiny of time and the saturation of continuous listening. Given the historical vastness and stylistic heterogeneity that characterize progressive rock, the mere contemplation of this task already elicits a profound discomfort. However, under apparent intellectual coercion, personified in the incisive challenge launched by Dusty, editor of Culture Catch, the author proposes to face this challenge, but aware of the potential verbal and perhaps physical attacks that may emanate from the defenders of works passed over. In return for this risk, the author imposes a condition: the acceptance of 2 distinct lists, one dedicated to classic progressive rock and another to neo-prog, a subgenre that deserves autonomous consideration. Before delving into the specific analysis of the selected albums, it becomes imperative to establish a conceptual framework that defines the contours of prog. Progressive rock, in its essence, transcends mere generic classification, configuring itself as a mentality, a conscious and deliberate approach to the composition of rock music, based on a series of recurrent elements. These elements include, without being limited to, appropriation and integration of diverse influences, the incorporation of elements from Western erudite music, classical, jazz, etc., from Eastern musical traditions, Indian, Middle Eastern, etc., or from the so-called world music, African, Latin, etc., represents a defining characteristic of prog. Innovative harmonies, the utilization of unconventional harmonic progressions deviating from the typical patterns of rock, contributes to the complexity and sophistication of the progressive sound. Complex rhythms, the adoption of irregular meters or the constant alternation of time signatures challenge the rhythmic conventions of traditional rock, promoting a more dynamic and unpredictable auditory experience. Expanded instrumentation, the inclusion of atypical instruments in the context of rock, from the saxophone, flute and violin to the sitar, bagpipes and African percussion, enriches the sonic palette and confers a unique texture to the compositions. Elaborate arrangements, an orchestral approach to arrangements, with intricate layers of instrumentation and a meticulous attention to detail, elevates prog music to a level of sophistication comparable to that of erudite music. Elongated structures, compositions of considerable duration, frequently interspersed with extended instrumental sections, allow for the development of complex musical ideas and the exploration of involving sonic narratives. Virtuosity, the exhibition of exceptional technical skills on the part of the musicians, manifested in prolonged and intricate solos, demonstrates instrumental mastery and dedication to the art of performance. Profound themes, lyrics that tend towards esotericism, fantasy, and/or literary allusion, addressing philosophical, existential and social themes with an uncommon depth in rock. Technological innovation, the utilization of keyboards, mellotron, synthesizers, etc., and the recording studio itself as creative tools, exploring sound effects, textures and atmospheres that transcend mere musical reproduction. It is important to emphasize that this definition, although comprehensive, is neither exhaustive nor devoid of controversy. However, it serves as a useful starting point for understanding the essential characteristics of progressive rock. Secondly, it is crucial to recognize that, although progressive rock has flourished in several countries around the world, its historical roots and initial evolution are inextricably linked to the British musical scene. The United States naturally played an important role in the dissemination of the genre, and countries such as Italy, Sweden, Germany, Canada, and France developed vibrant prog communities, producing bands of international caliber. However, to avoid cognitive overload, the present list will focus exclusively on works in English. Finally, the selection of the albums that compose this list is based on two main criteria: historical importance and artistic representativeness. In other words, the objective is to identify the most influential bands and the most emblematic works of progressive rock, those that best synthesize the essence of the genre and that continue to inspire new generations of musicians and listeners. Additionally, it is important to note that the albums will be presented in chronological order of release, and not by the order of emergence of the artists in the prog scene. I recommend these 12 essential albums to anyone who wants to get started in the seminal period of progressive rock, 1969 to 1977. King Crimson, In the Court of the Crimson King, 1969. While the year 1967 witnessed the emergence of experimental works, such as the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Pink Floyd's The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and the Moody Blues Days of Future Past, none prepared the world for the seismic impact of In the Court of the Crimson King. This dark and frighteningly brilliant album not only defined the genre, but established a new paradigm for rock music. Led by guitarist and composer Robert Fripp, it features Greg Lake bass and vocals, Ian MacDonald saxophone, keyboards and vocals, Michael Giles drums and vocals, and Peter Sinfield lyrics. According to critics such as Alterman, it created a gestalt of progressive sensibilities and musical virtuosity. From the dissonances of 21st century schizoid man to the mellotron of the Court of the Crimson King, this work remains a singular achievement in rock. The Moody Blues, On the Threshold of a Dream, 1969. After paving the way for progressive rock with their debut album, Days of Future Past, 1967, the Moody Blues released several critically acclaimed albums. On the Threshold of a Dream, 1969, however, stands out for its exploration of complex and profound emotions. This album solidified the band's reputation as pioneers in progressive music. Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Same, 1970. This prog power trio, comprised of former members of the Nace, King Crimson, and Atomic Rooster, created bombastic prog at its best, taking classical pieces and adapting them for rock instrumentation, and writing quasi-classical and pop pieces with a decidedly pompous edge. Top-notch virtuoso musicianship takes it to another level entirely. Jethro Tull, Thick as a Brick, 1972. Led by the quirky and brilliant songwriter-vocalist flautist Ian Anderson, Jethro Tull had already long been producing the most wide-ranging prog of any band when they released this magnum opus among rock's great full-length narrative concept albums. Extremely approachable, it relates the fictitious story of a young man who is suspended from school for writing a quasi-pornographic poem. The album masterfully blends elements of classical, medieval, jazz, rock and pop. Yes. Close to the Edge, 1972. Once master axeman Steve Howe and legendary keyboardist Rick Wakeman joined founding members John Anderson, lyrics, vocals, Chris Squire bass, and Bill Bruford drums, early in 1972. Yes, and their rival, Genesis, dominated their subgenre symphonic prog, putting out consistently creative, challenging, technically virtuosic, heavily textured, and heavily produced albums, often writing LP side-length masterworks of stunning musical and vocal complexity and lyrical fantasy. Widely considered their best work, this album joins King Crimson's In the Court as one without which no true prog collection is complete. Gentle Giant, Octopus, 1972. Among the most highly revered but lesser-known prog bands, this sextet of virtuoso multi-instrumental intellectuals created among the most intricate and often exciting amalgams of classical, medieval, and rock ever produced, adding in a healthy dose of humor and ending up with something complex yet approachable, even by the novice. Note should be made that their vocal harmonies rank with, and often surpass, the best of Yes, Queen, and other harmony-heavy bands. Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, 1973. There is little that has not been said about this album, which richly deserves all the accolades it has received. Nor are there enough adjectives to describe its brilliance, nor enough words to explain why. Having helped create the genre with its debut album, Piper at the Gates of Dawn, 1967, having continued to develop as a psychedelic band with an unrelenting experimental edge, and having influenced both the genre as a whole and dozens of other bands, Pink Floyd's masterwork brought prog to the masses, perfectly combining it with pop sensibilities. There is a reason this is the top-selling prog album of all time, spending a record 20 years on Billboard's Top 200. Needless to say, another album without which no prog collection is complete. Genesis, Selling England by the Pound, 1973. Along with Yes, Genesis dominated symphonic prog for well over a decade. Founded in 1970 by theatrical-minded lyricist, singer Peter Gabriel, the internal progression of the band was among the most natural of any group, as viewed through the lens of their first 4 albums. Thus it was that on this, their 5th album, the band would bring it all together and create a true masterpiece of prog. Combining the confident classical style of keyboardist Tony Banks, the deceptively simple, solid bass of Mike Rutherford, the moody, minimalist guitar work of Steve Hackett, and the almost frighteningly brilliant complexity of Phil Collins' drumming, Gabriel brought the band to its pinnacle with this winsome quasi-conceptual ode to the homeland. Frank Zappa, Apostrophe, 1974. With over 100 albums to his credit, the vast majority of which are very much worth listening to, trying to choose a best Zappa album is an exercise in futility inside an exercise in futility. However, if one is going to choose a single album that is approachable, especially by the novice, and not likely to get tedious after repeated listenings, Apostrophe is a good place to start, as it includes 3 of Zappa's funnest compositions: Don't Eat the Yellow Snow, Cosmic Debris, Stinkfoot, and one of his best instrumentals, the title track. Rick Wakeman, The Myths and Legends of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, 1975. If prog is about the elements listed in the preface above, then this album is as good a place as any to start the novice, as it is almost without question the perfect blending of concept, fantastical lyrics, orchestra, chorus, rock band, and almost every other element of prog noted above. It also happens to be an exceptionally brilliant and exciting album, as fresh on the 100th listen as it was on the first. Nectar, Recycled, 1975. Nectar had been creating experimental and psychedelic prog since 1971, and truly found their footing in 1974 with Remember the Future, their first cohesive full-length concept album, NB. Along with Pink Floyd, Nectar was one of the progenitors of the type of stage and light shows later associated with arena rock. However, with Recycled, the band finally mastered a crucial element in the use of keyboards and the recording studio to create textures and atmospheres that truly enveloped the music. It helped that they brought in guest keyboard master Larry Fast. With ecology and the environment as their theme, an issue about which they truly care and would use again, Nectar delivered a masterwork of beauty, poignancy, and complexity, centered around guitarist-songwriter Roy Albrighton's unique and compelling guitar style. Mahavishnu Orchestra, Visions of the Emerald Beyond, 1975. As much jazz fusion as prog rock, Mahavishnu produced among the most complex and demanding music in prog, and included some of the most technically gifted musicians in any genre. And although Birds of Fire, 1973, is considered by most Mahavishnu aficionados to be their magnus opus, I chose Visions because it is a more approachable album and thus might be less frightening for the novice. Well, at least a little bit. Klaatu, Hope, 1977. For my Baker's Dozen final choice, I have chosen this album for a host of reasons, in addition to the fact that, despite its obvious brilliance, it is perhaps the most underappreciated album in all of prog. Keeping in mind that I am going to be on a desert island with only 13 albums, the other reasons I chose this obscure, but undeniably extraordinary, album are since I can't take any Beatles with me, Klaatu is the next best thing, given their unabashed, unapologetic Beatlesque sound, and the story is about a man who is the sole survivor of his entire planet, and what could be more appropriate under the circumstances. Thus, the presented list, although open to contention and susceptible to other interpretations, represents an attempt to capture the essence of seminal progressive rock, offering a guide for those who wish to venture into this rich and complex musical universe.